Hey mate, I know we were debriefing before about that paediatric job we just attended, and you mentioned that you felt your communication wasn't the best and you could stand to improve. Look mate, I completely empathise. When I was a newly qualified paramedic, I found it really hard to talk to patients, especially paediatric patients. But I sourced education and I found resources to help me develop these communication skills. So as registered paramedics, it's really important to be able to identify and correct gaps in our knowledge through education, but we also need to be able to critically analyse and critique the resources that we're using for our education. So I came across this, it's called a FOMED resource. If you want to pull it up on your phone, mate, FOMED, and this resource focuses specifically on communication in paediatric critical care. So FOMED is an educational adjunct, free, open access online medical education, and it can take the form of a blog or a website. In this case, it's a blog, and it's written by a paediatric doctor, Dr. Natalie May. She's worked in both the UK and Australia, and it's published on the virtual hospital website St Elman's, which focuses on medical education. And it highlights the issues with communication and conversations in paediatric critical care. So as I said, an important part of evidence-based medicine is analysing and critiquing resources. So when we critique resources, we want to assess them for validity, for trustworthiness, value, and relevance to our practice as paramedics. So to start off, we'll look at the chosen resource and we're going to assess the validity of the resource. So if we look at it here you've got it on your phone, but I'll also pull it up on the computer. So we're looking at a resource's design and also its method. So it takes the form of a blog on an online platform, and it's written by a qualified expert focusing on communication in the field of paediatric emergency medicine. So we look at the blog, and it primarily focuses on the author's personal opinions of the topic. And we want to be careful of this generally because of the risk of inherent bias. However, in this case, the author has included multiple references from different sources, including some peer-reviewed journals like Emergency Medicine Australasia and the Emergency Medicine Journal. And these lend weight to the author's statements. So when we look at the references, one was actually a retrospective analysis which examined patient complaints from 36 Victorian emergency departments over a 61-month period. And the conclusion drawn was that 1/3 of those complaints actually arose from inadequate communication. So we can see that communication is a really important part in medicine, and especially in our field as paramedics. So moving on, the blog has also attempted to address the importance of different patient cultures and how this can impact on the receipt of communication, including the different perceptions of illness according to the culture of the patient and the patient's families. And these support the resource's validity by providing credibility. So when we're looking more about credibility, let's dive into it and that. So we're concluding that the source is also credible, the source itself, because it's written within the last 7 years by an expert in the relevant field, and it's on a reputable publishing platform, and you can see that there's multiple peer-reviewed resources and references. So now when we look at the resource's trustworthiness, we can see that it's written by a field expert and it's supported by multiple peer-reviewed references. So the resource also provides advice that's useful in multiple settings, not just in a hospital setting, but in our practices as paramedics, particularly regarding non-technical skills, because communication is something that we do every day as paramedics, and we're expected to communicate with so many diverse patients from so many different backgrounds. So you can see that communication really is core to what we do. There are some limitations to the resource, so it's written from an in-hospital perspective, remember, by a doctor, and a lot of the references are actually older than 7 years. However, the blog also addresses the importance of communication from multiple angles and considers the viewpoints of the parent, the relative, but also the clinician. So we can see, therefore, that we can consider the source to be credible, to be transferable, but also valid to our practice. So speaking about the value and the relevance of the resource to our practice as paramedics, we need to remember that we often neglect our non-technical skills like our communication and our interpersonal and interdisciplinary interactions, because we want to do those hard skills like cannulation and intubation, Also, as paramedics, we don't go to a lot of paediatric patients in general, unless you're, an intensive care paramedic or a critical care paramedic. You're going to have a little bit more exposure to those patients because you're often called to support, regular on-road paramedics. So, in the interests of protecting patient safety and supporting good patient outcomes, we really need to educate ourselves on the importance of conversation and communication with parents and caregivers, particularly in a paediatric context. So to kind of wrap that up, mate, and to wrap up what we were talking about, I think this resource is really valid and really important, particularly, as paramedics, we're expected to interact with such a wide variety of people and patients. So thank you really very much for your time, and thank you for spending some time with me today as we've critiqued this resource. So I really do think it's valid, trustworthy, and relevant to our practice. Thank you for your time.